So starting off with week one, guys, we're going to be covering understanding property and the property market, and it's an action-packed week. There's so much information we're going to go over, so let's jump straight into it. So guys, how I've actually structured the Property Academy program is that each week we're actually going to be highlighting the learning outcome expected once you complete each week's lesson. So on this week's lesson, understanding property and the property market, after completing this week's lesson, you'll be able to quickly identify what properties are most valuable and attractive as an investment and why. You'll be able to understand basic legal paperwork surrounding property, as well as understanding or easily identify the do's and don'ts when purchasing property. You'll be able to draw up a sales and purchase agreement like an expert, and really understand the property market and understand how it actually affects us. So for the first unit we'll be talking about, guys, is Unit 1, where we'll be talking about the different types of property, determining what you should be buying. So firstly, guys, to understand property, we're going to have to go over the types of property that are available on the market. And we're just going to go over the main types of properties. We won't be covering lifestyle sections and just sections on its own, or land and, etc. That's not what I do. I don't look at development opportunities and extra land and stuff like that. So the main things we'll be covering is the actual types of properties available. So on this slide here, you can actually see we've got a house here. It's a freestanding house. And basically with the freestanding house, there's many pros on why people like this type of property, or why they want to buy it as a first home, or why they want to buy it as a personal investment, and why it works really well as a trade as well. So the pros of buying a house on its own freestanding section, what we also call freehold, is you actually own the land and have full rights to it, as it's not the case for a cross lease, which you may have also heard of, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this lesson as well. So you actually fully own the house and have all the rights to carry out repairs and improvements. It's generally larger than other property types, such as units and apartments and stuff of that nature. There's more privacy, there's less noise compared to other property types, and car parking is generally not an issue because it normally comes with a car park or a carport, or enough space or land for you to actually park. It's generally decent sized land. We're talking anywhere from 300 square meters upwards to about 600, 700 square meters to about 800 square meters. That's kind of the normal size land we normally come across. And the benefits of a house is it's very attractive for young families, and to me it's kind of more the high demand type of stock that we can get our hands on, because it's easy to sell. It's what people are after. Now, the disadvantages of buying something like a freehold property on its own freestanding section is it generally is more expensive to buy. It's one of the more expensive options when buying, and there's generally more maintenance compared to others. An example of that is mowing lawns, need to carry out own property maintenance from time to time, whereas if you're living in a massive unit block and stuff like that, Body Corp or apartment management would actually take care of all of this. So it's not the case for this, but still a very good property type that's very sought after. So the next type of property we're going to be talking about, guys, is what we call a unit. And you can actually see in the image on the slide here of what a unit looks like. And I suppose the easiest way to identify what a unit is basically it's one big building with a lot of small buildings inside that are separated internally. So from this image that you can see, it appears that there's actually 3 doors or 3 balconies, and that's kind of distinguishing to me that there's 3 units in this sausage block. It's one long block of many different units. And I suppose the benefits of buying a unit is it's a lot more affordable. It's on the cheapest scale in terms of property available on the market. And a big reason for that is because you've got 3 actual units here, which can mean 3 different owners, but the size of the land is actually split between everyone, right? So the value is often in the land. So the bigger the land, the more expensive the property. And often you'll find with units don't actually have a lot of access to land. Other disadvantages of units are that the floor areas are generally smaller than most homes. They're also connected to other units, so in terms of noise, you're going to have to deal with the noise that your neighbors make because the walls may not be soundproof. Not always the case, depending on how the units were built. You may have firewalls and soundproof walls in between, so that can drastically reduce the noise as well. Often there's a shared driveway, so you will have to be compromising with your neighbors when you are going in and out of the property. And often there's no garage, but we do find that there's often carports available when you're buying a unit, but it's not always the case as well. It's case on case it's often either a carport or nothing at all. And in terms of units on the property market, I mean, we've dealt with a ton of units in the past, and they make for really good investments for beginner investors because it's on the lower side of the price range in terms of what they can afford. And equally for first home buyers, it's a good starting point to buy something before getting the next 3-bedroom house on a freehold section. My first home was actually a unit that I bought, and it was a 2-bedroom where I actually added an extra bedroom and then flipped it and made a very healthy profit. Also to note with units, it's case on case, but certain units, especially if there's a unit block of say 10 units or more, there's definitely going to be a body corp involved, which what that means is it's a collective of every owner pulling together money to maintain the entire building. Because it's not like a house where you can actually say, well, I want to fix the roof because the roof is leaking. A body corp is actually something where everyone has a contribution in it, and it's really depending on case. If it's a small sausage block of 3, like my first unit was 1 out of 3 units, we didn't actually have a body corp, and everyone maintained their own property, even though the exterior of the property was one whole building. Depending on where the damage was, for example, if there was a leak directly in my unit, I would be the one paying for that, and my neighbors wouldn't have to contribute. Versus a unit with 10 units in there, it may be the case that the neighbors will have to contribute, and normally there's a fund or a pool of funds that everyone's actually contributed in prior to actually buying the property as well. That's something you guys will come across when you're actually going out there and looking at units. So it's a learning process, and you learn by doing. So on this slide here, we can see we're going to be covering what we call a duplex, and the image here shows what a duplex is, which essentially is 2 properties right next to each other, almost again connected by kind of one external building, but very much separated in between. And they've done it this way so that it's cost efficient. You can actually house 2 owners or 2 families inside there, all whilst reducing the footprint of the entire area of not taking up so much land. And basically the benefits of buying a duplex is that often it's a lot cheaper than buying a freestanding house. Again, the main reason for that is because there's not your separate type of land, or even though you do have your own separate land out back, essentially the land is a lot smaller. There's more living space compared to an apartment or a unit. Often duplexes is a lot bigger, and it can be the case that it ranges from a 3-bedroom all the way up to kind of a 5, 6, 7-bedroom property as well. In most cases, properties also come with a small garden out back, and it's quite a modern property. So I find that duplexes are normally built kind of around the 1990s all the way to where we are now. And in most cases, size and structure are similar to a house as well, in terms of how they're built. Now, the disadvantages of a duplex, again, is because you're so close to your neighbors, sound can be an issue. You do share a wall with your neighbors, and the land may also be shared as well, although you may have your exclusive use. Driveways may possibly be shared again, or depending if this is road frontage or not. If it is road frontage, you're both just driving into your own garages, which you can see in this image here anyway. And in a lot of cases, duplexes are on cross-lease titles. Not always, but if it is on a cross-lease title, again, what that means, guys, is any work that you want to carry out through the home, you actually have to get your permissions from your neighbors first, because it essentially means you're leasing their land and they're leasing your land, which is what a cross-lease is. We'll cover it in more detail further on down today's lesson as well. Also, another disadvantage of a duplex is your property may be prone to the same damages to the other duplex as well. So if there was some form of damage or leak coming in from your neighboring property on the duplex, that leak may travel in between the walls and actually damage your property as well. So you don't get that isolation as you would from buying a freestanding home. So the next type of property we're going to be talking about is what we call a townhouse. And you can see from the image below that essentially a townhouse is a 2-story building that's also often attached to a similar building of the same design. Now, sometimes it doesn't always have to be attached to be called a townhouse, as long as it's kind of got the 2-story and it's got a small maintainable garden. Typically, we call that a townhouse. And it's very similar to what we have, what we call a duplex, but a townhouse can be, kind of 3 or more buildings in one kind of block. And in this image here, you'll see 4 buildings in that kind of block. And to me, it kind of feels like a mixture of a house and apartment is what a townhouse is. Because it's very closely connected, and there are many different pros and cons, so let's just go over what they are. So the pros are that it's definitely cheaper than buying a house. There's more living space compared to an apartment. In most cases, the property also comes with a small garden, which can be good if you want to have a few herbs and a few plants outside as well. Size and structure is similar to a house. In most cases, there may or may not, in most cases for a townhouse that's connected, there's typically not a body corp, but if there's more than, say, 3 or 4 in a block, then sometimes there is a body corp involved as well. Now, the disadvantage or the kind of, I suppose, cons of having a townhouse is that there is no space in between your townhouse and your neighbors, so sound can be an issue. You are sharing a wall with the neighbors sometimes, if it is attached. Improvements sometimes are limited as well, because if the property is actually attached to another property, you're going to have to ask their permission, and you can't go out and do extensions and stuff like that. So what you want to do to the property is limited in this situation. The land is often shared with other owners as well. However, they can still be on a freehold title section. It's just depending on the title and what case on case on depending on the type of townhouse you're looking at. The driveways are often shared between townhouses. On the image that you can see here, there is no driveway, so that's obviously a plus. And your property is actually prone to damages because it's connected to other properties. Sometimes that their properties, if there's a leak and a neighbor's neglecting that leak, may also drag on over to your property as well and start to damage and deteriorate your building. So that's the disadvantage of having a townhouse. And on the last type of property we're going to be covering is an apartment. So I believe most people are aware or have some idea or a preconceived notion of what an apartment is. So it's fairly straightforward, and I'll go over the pros and cons with you guys as well. So basically an apartment, you can see here in the image here, is basically one big building with a lot of individual living spaces inside. And the benefits of an apartment is often it's more affordable than a freestanding home. It's very low maintenance, as generally this is taken care of by the apartment management or the body corporate. And it's actually perfect for people that don't have a big family. So if it's students or people that are living alone, they don't have a big family or anything like that, it's a perfect living situation for them. Some apartments, depending on the quality and how much you're paying, actually have built-in amenities such as gyms, pools and cafes and stuff like that. So it can be really convenient so that you don't have to travel outside for these amenities as well. The bills and utility fees can possibly be lower as well due to the small occupancy space that you require for the apartment. But there are a lot of disadvantages living in an apartment as well. Of course, the living size is a lot smaller. There may be the case of lack of car parks, or often you actually have to pay for your own car park. So, when you're having visitors over, there are normally a section for visitors to park as well, but it's not as flexible as if you were to own your own property or your own land. There's less privacy, and it can be a lot more noisy as well. And the personalization of your own apartment, depending on what you're wanting to do, if it's more than just cosmetic and the standard paint job and stuff like that, can be quite limited, because you actually have to follow the rules of the apartment management. And of course that comes at a fee, case on case, depending on which apartment you're looking at. But it is a percentage that you'll be paying every single year, and it can range from $2,000 a year all the way up to 10 grand or more, depending on the amenities and the type of apartment, and depending on the area you're in as well. So guys, we've just covered the different property types, and what we're going to be talking about now over the next few slides are the types of claddings, and what cladding to buy and what cladding to actually avoid and not touch at all. So the cladding, what I mean by this is what the property is made from. Is it brick and tile, is it weatherboard, is it timber weatherboard, or what is it actually made from? And in this image here, what we'll be talking about first is brick and tile. So it's very straightforward. It was popular years ago, and it's always been a popular choice. And the big reason for that is the general public perception see brick and tile as a very durable and structurally sound type of cladding. And it's definitely favored amongst a lot of people, especially in the Asian community. People prefer brick and tile because they assume it's going to stand to the test of time. And they're probably right. If there's no major earthquakes or natural disasters, it's probably going to be the type of cladding that's going to stay around for years and years to come. And you can tell by this image, it's pretty easy to identify what a brick and tile is. Basically, if it looks like this, you're onto a winner. It's brick and tile. You've got bricks for the main structure of the home, and you've got a tiled roof. And there's a lot of benefits with brick and tile. It's actually low maintenance. It's proven performance and longevity. There's a high demand with properties in this type of cladding, so it makes for an easy sale when it comes time to offloading the property. And it actually looks good as well. It looks very tidy and it looks very sound and strong as well. I suppose the disadvantages is, with claddings that's high quality, it generally is going to be a little bit more expensive than the other properties with other types of cladding. But, that's expected because what you're paying for is what you get. And I know I mentioned just a moment ago that, it's structurally sound, and unless there's a major earthquake or a natural disaster, that it's really going to stand to its test of time. And there's actually a disadvantage in brick and tile because it can be prone to earthquakes. However, if there's timber framing in between, it actually reduces exposure to this type of damage as well. Overall, brick and tile is very sought after, and it's definitely a winner in my books as well. So the next type of cladding we're looking at, guys, is what we call timber weatherboard. And timber weatherboard has always been quite popular back in the day and now as well, very similar to brick and tile. It's always been a popular choice, and I'd say it classifies as one of the top 3 types of cladding that you can get available on the open market as well. And the reason being is because it is very versatile, it is very resilient, and it's capable of withstanding a lot of different climates as well. And the general public perception is that it is very strong, and it is a very versatile cladding, which makes it very popular as well. Very easy to identify. You can see on this image here that it looks like it's a wooden exterior, and you won't know for sure until you actually visit and inspect the property. But hey, if you knock on the property and you feel it and it feels like wood, you're onto a winner, because weatherboard is definitely very sought after as well. Now, just in terms of the different types of profiles, there can be pine weatherboard, there can be cedar weatherboard, all of which are a variation of different timbers. And I'd say there's no kind of favorism on what type of profile would be better than another. As long as it's weatherboard and it's in good condition, it's definitely a winner in my books. And you can see in the image on the slide here, we've got an example of what a timber weatherboard home looks like, and often the pattern is you'll see the weatherboard kind of stacking on top of each other, kind of giving you that it's a strange pattern design where you overstack each other. But there are cases where weatherboard homes aren't designed in the same way, and it could be a linear approach where there's actually a kind of separation between each board as well. Whatever the case, we find that weatherboard homes are very easy to sell. They're very sought after as well, and it's a great classic look as well. It allows for movement, so when the weather goes hot or cold, and that materials in itself need to kind of expand and go back to its original form, weatherboard homes can actually allow for this kind of movement and therefore reduce possible damage as well. The disadvantages are that it does need to be painted every kind of 7 to 10 years, and that's to ensure the weatherboard maintains the weather tightness and ensures protection from sun and stuff like that as well. And disadvantage is that if it is exposed to moisture, wood can rot, and that becomes a problem. Depending on how far it's been neglected, if the wood's been seeping into the framework, then that's something you're going to have to replace as well. Expect a premium for weatherboard because we find that although it's slightly cheaper than brick and tile, it's still more expensive than the other types of cladding because of the benefits that it provides and the public perception that the public has on the quality of weatherboard homes. So the next type of cladding we're going to be talking about is what we call UPVC, also known as Palisade. Now, I don't actually know what the abbreviation stands for, but I definitely know when I come across a UPVC or Palisade cladding, I know what the attributes it has as a Palisade cladded home. And look, it's been very popular back in the day, and it's still slowly becoming more popular. The general public perception is that most people would still prefer timber over plastic. So that's what UPVC is in Palisade cladding. It essentially looks like weatherboard, but it feels like plastic. In fact, it is plastic. And when you touch it and feel it, it's very smooth. There's no kind of textured feeling as you would with timber and weatherboard. And the reason for it is because it's essentially made from plastic. The benefits of buying a palisade cladded home is that often it's pre-finished, so the color or design is often pre-finished. There's no need to paint or repaint it. It's very, very low maintenance, and the benefits here is that all you need to do is just water blast it every few years and it'll look brand new. It's a lot cheaper than traditional timber weatherboard, and you won't get any issues with borer or termites as you would do with weatherboard, and of course you're not going to have to worry about weather damage and rot and stuff like that as well. Disadvantages being that because it's made out of plastic, it is prone to the sun UV rays, but of course we feel that it's not enough, the sun's not enough damage to actually damage the palisade cladding. Otherwise they wouldn't have designed it or even manufactured this type of cladding. You are limited to color and choices because of the previous fact that it is all pre-finished and done for you by the manufacturers. And expect to pay a premium as well because it is very good quality in terms of cladding. It's just a shame the public perception still prefers more traditional cladding over newer, more innovative cladding, even though it does its job. And we find that it's cheaper than timber weatherboard because you don't actually have to paint it every 7 to 10 years, and it takes care of itself. So we're going to be covering Fiberlite cement, which is also known as HardiePlank cladding. And it's been popular back in the days, and it's still widely accepted in today's market, but the public perception is that it is a lot inferior to weatherboard and some of the other types of cladding that we talked about earlier. And I'll be covering some of the pros and cons and why that is. But the easiest way to identify HardiePlank is basically by how wide the sheets are. You can remember from the previous slide that the weatherboard didn't look as wide as you can see on this image here on this slide here, and that's one way to tell. Now when I say in terms of wideness, and I really mean the height ratio compared to the weatherboard. In terms of thickness though, timber weatherboard is definitely a lot thicker than HardiePlank or Fiberlite cement. And that's another reason why the public perception is that it's inferior to timber weatherboard, because timber weatherboard is a lot thicker compared to HardiePlank, or also known as Fiberlite cement. Another easy way to identify if you have Fiberlite cement cladding or HardiePlank is how the nails are actually nailed into the boards. And basically with Fiberlite cement or HardiePlank, it's actually made from a concrete material so that you can't actually knock all the nails fully in. Often you won't find nails that are fully flush against the clad itself, which means it's actually a Fiberlite cement clad or a HardiePlank clad property. The pros is that it's a lot cheaper. Well, I wouldn't say a lot. It's a little cheaper than the types of other claddings we've talked about previously. It is very low maintenance, and you won't have to deal with any borers or termites chewing through your cladding because you're not dealing with timber. Good thing, again, not dealing with timber is that you don't have to worry about rot or moisture as well. That is coming from the weather or of that nature. The disadvantages being that it is brittle because, again, it is made from a very thin cement, so it is fairly easy to crack. And it's cheaper than brick and tile and weatherboard, but it still generally costs more than some of the other claddings we're going to talk about moving forward as well. Weatherside is the next type of cladding we're going to be covering, and this one's going to be very interesting because when you see this image, when you're actually looking at this image, you guys will probably be thinking, well, this doesn't actually look any different to the previous image, which was HardiePlank and Fiberlite cement. And I'll explain why it's so important to understand your claddings and understand the difference between Weatherside and HardiePlank and Fiberlite cement, because if you get mistaken for HardiePlank when it's actually Weatherside, then the damage can actually cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you've bought a home where the whole property needs to be recladded. So back in the days pre-1980s, this was a very popular choice for cladding, but the general public perception actually removed this from the market since the 1980s because it was underperforming. It was a clad that wasn't doing its job. It wasn't protecting the homes from the weather and other natural causes, other natural effects. And basically how we want to identify the difference between weatherside versus hardy plank is how it feels. You can't tell by often looking just at a picture, and even real estate agents don't really know what they're doing. So this is something we're going to have to learn on our own by actually going out there and feeling it. And by looking at it on the images, it looks very similar. It looks very similar to Fiberlight cement, and it can even look, according to weatherboard, it can look very similar to timber weatherboard. And the big difference on how to identify and tell the difference is actually feel underneath the clad. Right underneath the bottom, you can see that there's actually a chip on one of the boards there, on the weatherside boards that you can see, and the paint's actually been removed. When you get exposed to seeing the clad without the paint, you can actually very easily tell whether it's a Fiberlight cement home, whether it's a timber weatherboard home, or whether it's a weatherside home. And basically, if you were to go on site to feel the type of cladding for weatherside, you'll notice that without the paint, you can see and feel, it feels almost like Weet-Bix. It feels like Weet-Bix board, which is similar to your muesli that you eat for breakfast, right? That's what it feels like. It feels like it's you know, especially if it's wet as well, it feels like mushed up Weet-Bix that's brittle and deteriorating. And there are benefits of this as well. If if you understand the type of cladding, you just have to pay the right price and don't get caught out by thinking it's a different type of cladding. And the benefits of weatherside is, look, it's very cheap, and it actually appears to look like weatherboard and hardy plank, right? The disadvantages are that it's very, very prone to rot, and it must be maintained super well to a high standard. Otherwise there will be moisture issues, which will basically turn the weatherside into a Weet-Bix board very fast and essentially rot out the entire house. On the lower end of the spectrum, it is in terms of pricing on the lower end of the spectrum, comparable to plaster homes, which we'll talk about shortly as well. But due to the fact that it looks similar to weatherboard and hardy plank, it can attract slightly higher prices, and that's because the buyers aren't in the know and they assume that it is weatherboard. If the agents aren't aware as well, they may not have to actually disclose the information because they weren't aware of it either. And just to give you an example, guys, I actually bought a property that was partially weatherboard and partially hardy plank. I had assumed the whole home was actually a hardy plank cladded home. However, there was about 1/3 of the home that was actually Weet-Bix board, or aka weatherside. And because I didn't do my due diligence and actually physically walk around and very carefully inspect the entire cladding and assume that the area that I looked at, it was hardy plank and Fiberlight cement, I said, okay, well, the rest of the house must be the same clad. And generally it is. Generally it is the case where one side of the home has one sort of cladding, the whole house has the same sort of cladding as well. It's very rare to actually have a case of a mixture of different clads. But that's exactly where I got caught out. I didn't physically walk around the property carefully inspecting all sides of the home, and I got caught out by buying a home where I thought it was a fully Fiberlight cement property. I found out it was weatherside, and our repairs cost actually shot up through the roof. Rather than spending the 10 to 15,000 on the whole property in terms of a cosmetic renovation, we ended up spending close to double that because of the cladding. Good news is, because I managed to buy the property at an awesome price, we still managed to turn a profit. However, that's a lesson I'll never forget, and you guys can actually learn from that mistake and ensure that you're buying the right home and ensure that you're buying the right home with the right cladding. You don't get caught out by mistakenly thinking that the timber weatherboard home is actually in fact weatherside, or same instance with Fiberlight cement as well. Another big clad to stay away from is monolithic cladding, also known as plaster cladded homes. And the big two that I recommend just not dealing with at all, it's not worth the time or the hassle or the money, especially the money, is weatherside properties and homes cladded with monolithic cladding or plaster cladded. And I'll explain why. Because although it's been popular back in the days, and it was actually very much in use from the 1990s to the year 2000s, the general public perception now is that the perception about monolithic cladding homes are just terrible. The public actually refers to these type of homes as leaky houses. So you definitely don't want to be buying anything that the public refers back to leaky houses. And the way to identify the cladding is, it's very straightforward. It doesn't look like brick, it doesn't look like weatherboard or weatherside, but it's flat. You can see on this image here below that it's very flat. But when you actually go out and feel it, there is a rough surface. It is slightly textured. Now, just to make a note, you know, you want to make sure that you're not actually comparing homes that are actually cladded with rough cast. I haven't made a separate slide for rough cast because they look fairly similar in terms of the visual, but rough cast was a cladding that was quite popular back in the 1940s, and typically it has a more, I suppose, rougher and more textured feel than monolithic, and rough cast homes didn't actually have any leaky connotation associated with it. However, because they're still, you know, in the public eye, the public may not be able to tell the difference. The instant public perception is, you know, it's a leaky home. So it may even be better for you guys to stay away from rough cast homes. There's not that many. I personally haven't come across buying and trading a rough cast home, but certainly the more prominent you know, clad that is around is the monolithic clad and plaster clad. And you know, there is actually some benefit in this type of cladding. It's actually one of the more affordable homes, even in terms of floor area and land. And if you've got a substantial amount of land and it's a very big two-story home like the one you can see in this image here, often it will be several $100,000s cheaper than the exact same property if it was cladded in timber weatherboard or brick and tile. You know, so let's just say, for example, just a hypothetical example, this home was on the market for you know, $600,000. Well, you know, if you had the same property and it was actually cladded in brick and tile or timber weatherboard, the timber weatherboard / brick and tile home would actually fetch probably closer to $800,000. You know, that's the type of difference you'd be looking at. So not all is bad about the monolithic and plaster cladded homes. If you are purely wanting to buy a place to live in it, then great. You know, you're not worried because you're getting a bargain, because in terms of cost per square meter, you're getting a pretty good, a very good deal. Now, the disadvantage is that the public perception sees it as a leaky home, and a lot of properties built in the 1990s to 2000s are in fact leaky. There are plaster cladded homes built after the 2000s, and they've actually had cavities in between the walls to reduce the leakage or the moisture and stuff like that. But that still doesn't take away the public perception that the public doesn't agree with that. And look, to me personally, it doesn't look as appealing. There's no what I call character. It looks very plain and boring to me. You know, you're not going to be able to expect a premium for this type of property as well. So, you know, those are the big kind of differences between plaster and monolithic clads to what we've been discussing before. And the big thing for you guys is just stay away from it. It's not something that is worthwhile looking into when you're starting out. But once you get more advanced, it may be something that you could possibly take on if you find a vendor that's willing to sell their property at a discounted rate because of the whole plaster clad and monolithic scenario. And if you've got a builder's background, or you've actually got the resources to actually reclad the entire home, then hey, that may be something you want to look at potentially, and then put it back on the market and get a premium for it. I know property traders that do this. I personally don't do this because I think it's too time consuming, and my time is better spent looking for the next deal that's a lot easier, where you can turn the same amount of profit. But hey, that's an option for you guys when you are a bit more advanced as well. So in summary, guys, you can see on the slide here, I've created 2 columns, very straightforward, one called buy and one called avoid. So over the types of cladding we've discussed, brick and tile is a big tick. Timber weatherboard or variations of timber weatherboard is also a go for me. Palisade, UPVC weatherboard, that's also good in my books. And often you won't actually find many homes with this type of cladding anyway, but if you do, it's something that you can definitely go ahead and purchase. Hardy plank, also known as Fiberlite cement, is also widely accepted, so it's you know, it's definitely something that we purchase as well. And what to avoid: you want to avoid weatherside, which is also known as Weet-Bix board. You want to avoid rough cast, although there's no actual negative connotation with rough cast in terms of its characteristics, but the public perception still perceives rough cast They're very similar to plaster-cladded homes and monolithic homes, which is something to avoid as well. So you can see the buy list and what to avoid. If you print this out and ensure you're going out and checking these homes, just always remember this, and soon enough it will become second nature once you have a little bit more real-world experience by doing it as well. So we've gone through and covered quite a bit of information already. We've covered the different types of property and especially the different types of cladding available on those types of property and what to buy and what to avoid. So the next step of our fundamental basic training to really understand properties and what's sought after and what's not is understanding the paperwork. And we're just going to be covering the basics around the paperwork because it's something that your lawyer is more capable of explaining to you guys. But basically, what we're going to be covering on the slide is understanding what exactly is a title. And basically a title is the little piece of paper that legally states that you own the property. And not always the case that, depending on the property type, if it's not a freehold property, it may be a certificate to say that you own a property with a cross-lease land that you must share with your neighbors and vice versa. So essentially, the title is something that says you legally own a part of something. Whether the property is freehold, cross-lease, on a unit title, etc. So we're going to be covering in the next few slides the different types of titles you can get for the different types of property so that you actually understand when you get presented this title what you're actually looking at. So on the slide I've actually got an example of what a title looks like. It's a one-pager with all the relevant information that gives you all the information you need about the property, or as much information as the title can provide. And I've actually highlighted kind of 6 different points here which you guys can see comparable to the title. The first one being circled is what we call the unique identifier. It's what the lawyers actually search in their computer systems to figure out who owns what property by searching up that title, and then that will actually pull up all the information about the property. Number 2 is the estate type, whether the property is a fee simple freehold title, which we'll cover in the next few slides as well, to give you a better idea of what different types of estate types are available. Number 3 is the land size, and essentially it just gives you an idea of how many square meterage the land has. Number 4 is a legal description of the land, and it's a government or council description of the land, generally based in numbers. And to us it doesn't mean a lot, but for council and government and lawyers, that's something they kind of deal with. So not something we have to worry about too much. We've also got the current owners on number 5, which show who is the actual owner or what entity is the owner of that property. It could be a company, it could be a trust, it could be a physical person like we can see here. And also for number 6, we've got interest to note. Now, basically the interest to note, I've highlighted a few areas here that we'll actually be covering later on in this week's lesson. And the interest to note will be covering fencing agreements, fencing covenants, easements, subjects to a right-of-way, subjects to right-of-way and drain water, etc., mortgages to certain banks or companies, any caveats, and we'll actually cover all of this in a little while as well. So the first estate type that we'll be going over and helping you guys understand is what we call a fee simple. It's often referred to as an estate in fee simple, or also known as freehold. Now, freehold is not to be confused with actually having no mortgage at all. A fee simple title is considered to be the title that has the greatest benefit to the owner in respect of enjoyment and use. And the advantage of fee simple is you essentially own the whole of the land and able to make any additions or alterations to your property. Obviously subject to any council laws and consent requirements, without having to actually get the consents of neighboring properties, unlike a cross-lease title or a unit title, which we'll explain shortly in the next few slides as well. And you can actually see in this image here, it's very straightforward. I've actually highlighted and outlined what a fee simple property looks like, and that outline is the boundary that shows you essentially own all of that land and the property in itself, as well as that garage there as well. So it's very straightforward. It provides the most benefits, and we'll actually be covering some of the other estate types, and you can identify the differences between the different types of estate types and why one may be more favorable than another as well. So cross-lease is the next estate type that we'll be covering, and a cross-lease is basically where there's multiple individuals or entities that own basically an undivided share of land that they've actually built on, and the land is actually leased from the other owners, and vice versa. They lease it from you, you lease it to them, and often it's for a term of 999 years. I know it sounds strange, but that's just how it's been set up, and this was actually quite common and commonly used for townhouses or flats, although most new developments no longer use the system, and there's good reasons for why they've kind of not moved forward and continue using the system as well. Essentially, there are very important considerations when you're looking at buying cross-lease properties, as the joint ownership of the underlying land will create limitations and increase the checks that you will need to do before purchasing. It's very important. Selling a cross-lease property also requires extra care, as it can actually complicate the sales process if there are problems with the flats plan or it doesn't